right away here, we're going to get into hearing a little bit more from all of you, thinking about how your organizations are currently approaching hiring. Where are some of those places that you're already aware you wish looked differently? And so then that will help us try to imagine, where are some of those places that you're really keen on diving in a little bit deeper and really kind of spending the time. I know many of you in the Mighty Network who've participated already in Tim's first question have identified some of those spaces specifically that you're particularly interested in, whether it's sourcing or interviews or thinking about onboarding after the selection is made. So we're gonna start that new. We're gonna talk about the new arc, and then we're going to have that resource conversation. So as Tim mentioned, there's lots of different ways that this work can be resourced, and we know that you're all in different sizes of organizations. You've got different capacities. There's different levels of support for recruitment processes, and so really thinking about where are those areas, particularly in the spaces that you're in, where there might be more heavy lifting that's required. And so that might need some different kinds of conversation, or where, if there's a particular shift you're looking to make, how to kind of think about that and talk about that and bring others into that space to allow for exploration of what that really means within your organization. Tim and I have been playing with this approach with a few different organizations. But really the kind of the juicy part for us in this is for really to have all of you kind of work through and think about from a context perspective, because this isn't, always necessarily explode the model and build a new one. Sometimes it's that incremental shift where you're saying, we don't have the capacity to do this all at once. And so here are some of the main areas of focus. And here's what that means from resource perspectives. And then we're going to kind of at the end of today, there's going to be like homework, and the homework is going to be looking at a position description and really trying to decode, understand the kind of KSAs, the knowledge, skills, and abilities that that position requires, but then take a look at all of the other language that's in those postings and try to kind of understand, what it would look like to decode that language, whether it's ableist language or language that reflects characteristics of white supremacy culture or any other sort of dominant paradigms that are inherent in the language and the coding of those position descriptions. We're just going to ask you to sort of put a lens, different lenses on those postings and see what comes up for you. None of these fundamentals will be surprising probably to most of you, but we'll just run through them pretty quickly as well. So this idea of transparency, whether it's transparency within the organization about the process that's ongoing, whether it's between candidates and the process, applicants and the organization, all of those different aspects, and how we can make information available as early and as often as possible so that people trust the process, learn more about the organization in an authentic way, and can encourage that energy and investment, right? So I have so many experiences of being in interviews where questions are asked that we all kind of thought, well, if we knew that from the beginning, then what kind of conversation could we be having? How could we be spending this time we have together if we weren't so cagey and or so closed about what we're offering about, that would actually help people get a really, fair idea of what it looks like in reality. What are the scope of those roles? What do the benefits look like? What is the salary there? Who does this team work with? What are the values of the organization, and how are the staff, the employees, the people within the organization actually feeling and experiencing those values? And so that's where, Tim and I have been playing, we'll talk more about this. We've been playing with bringing more voices from the organization into that search process. And so maybe everybody isn't included in, that committee, but there's opportunities for people to participate in different ways, whether it's to provide insight or suggestions to the committee for structuring those interviews or interactions, or whether it's storytelling about the organization or the what the role signals in the organization, the opportunity to potential applicants as well. the curiosity. So really just thinking about like, we sometimes, when somebody leaves a role, we sometimes have a very clear sense of what it takes to be successful in that role. It means you have to find that person again, or you need, the new Katrina to be in this role, which is one of those rigidity traps, right? We're used to something all the time. And so we come to expect that whatever that next thing is has to sort of look and feel a little bit like what was there before. And so this fundamental for us really reminds us that people bring themselves into the roles, and they bring themselves and their unique kind of combinations of knowledge, skills, and abilities into what that role could look like. And so when we are talking to potential applicants, really thinking about, how do we ask them? How do we hear from them about how they're connecting the dots? How do they understand the opportunity, and where do they see the opportunity coming in? And, how do we talk about that so that we can actually kind of ignite our imagination about what this role could look like and how this team could look? Because when you add even one person to a team, right, you're changing the dynamic fundamentally of that team. And so we really need to sort of play and learn and understand and have people contribute to that in a really curious way. So another fundamental is consistency. We talked about that, like structure, high level of structure, to ensure that all of the candidates have a similar experience, right? When you have an interview where, you've got 10 questions, but then somebody comes in and all of a sudden you haven't asked 8 of those questions, you're not getting the same kind of information. You're not allowing those candidates the opportunity to answer all the questions that you're saying are important by putting them into that interview guide. And so that creates all kinds of bias. There are tons of ways that bias kind of creeps in. And so that structuring really helps us to, at the outset, reduce those opportunities for bias to creep in. But also, recognizing that there's a tension between, having a very structured process and keeping it dynamic, and having people not feel like robots, or not feel like they're getting a canned answer to a question they're asking about the organization. Building in as many mechanisms to bring diverse perspectives about the role, for the role, about the opportunity, the organization into the process helps to challenge assumptions and encourage that dialogue and critical and creative thinking about what the role is, and how it's situated in the organization, and what it can do, and how different people can bring in. So we play with this in terms of selection committees. We play with this in terms of sort of interviewing different parts of the organization to learn more. We use the rubric to explore and be able to have those conversations and say, oh, well, I heard this. Oh, I heard this. Oh, right. And remember, this person actually brought this forward for us. And so really being able to look from kind of an evidence-based way, when we have that consistent process, when we have lots of different brains and people and experiences feeding into our understanding of candidates and the opportunity, is really a critical piece. And finally, just this distribution of power. So as I said before, all over this process are ways that we are creating safe or kind of inherently unsafe spaces for candidates, selection committee members, and so really kind of thinking about how in those interview spaces, for example, how in screening, how in the debriefing of interviews, how do we really kind of create an opportunity for people to feel like they can contribute, and that we can have debate and disagreement and resolve in different ways.